Hello, everyone. This is Megan,
And this is Alana.
and welcome to Tea Time Crimes. All right. Hello, everybody. We
Hi.
miraculously made it back for a second episode.
Look at us.
Here we are. Before we start, we want to say thank you to Brad Frank for editing, setting up our
Yes.
microphones, and
Listening to
creating
all the
theme music.
bloopers.
Yeah, it's not a fun job. And Brad is my husband. So you'll hear some stories about him throughout the season, I'm sure.
Oh, well, yeah.
We made it back, though, and we're trying to learn from our first episode. So Alana has a new mic.
Woo woo.
And I've also learned to ignore her when the dogs are barking or the dishwasher's going off. So we're learning. We're going to get there.
We will.
Yeah. We're trying.
Have patience.
And what I want to start with today, because it was my favorite part of last week, was the teas have bodies freak out. And I want to know.
They do.
Yes, I was not aware. It's all me being completely unaware of a competent tea review. So what are you drinking today?
All right. So haven't even had my first sip yet. So we're really building up some suspense.
This is really live action.
Yeah. Watch out. So this is called Tulsi Focus Clementine Vanilla. All right. So it's for mental clarity and cognitive support, which I'm certainly going to need in the next hour.
Right.
It's caffeine free, organic, and there's a nice lady on the front.
Oh, she does look nice. She's in a field.
And so, yeah, so we're going to try it. It smells very...
There's a lot of dead air while you're smelling.
Herbal?
All right. So is it good to sip now, or is it too hot?
It's good. There is some notes of echinacea. Have you...
I'm trying really hard not to laugh this time. Go ahead. Notes of echinacea.
Yeah. Echinacea, that's very strong. It's very woody, very earthy.
Yuck. Maybe it could use a shot of honey.
Yes, honey would be good, but this reminds me of my childhood, because whenever we got sick, my mother would take out this dropper of echinacea and golden seal and force it, and it tastes like wood chips. So this is nice. It's nice.
Sounds lovely. Yeah, that sounds like a wonderful childhood memory you'd want to bring back to life.
I like it. Thanks, Mom.
For sure. Yeah, thanks, Jackie. Thanks for your help.
So that's the tea for the day.
All right, what's it called again?
It is Tulsi Focus.
All right, perfect. All right,
for any Avatar The Last Airbender fans, I'm drinking it out of Uncle Iroh cup, who is a known tea master. So
that reference is meaningless to me, but hopefully other people get it. I almost never understand any references, pop culture or sci-fi or fantasy.
It's true.
So that's why Alana's here. Okay.
All right.
So on that flavor note, let's get started. Did you like that? All right. So today we're going to tell you the story of two women whose fates were tragically linked.
Uh-oh.
We're going to tell you the story of Julia Wilkins and Audrey Munson. So we'll start with Julia. It was February 27th, 1919. And she is walking home from the Long Island train station with her husband, Dr. Walter Wilkins. Now, sadly, there's not a lot of information available today about Julia before this day. But from what I could gather, the description of her was she was short, stout, and strong-willed.
Okay, I like her already.
I know, which I fully feel. I get it. I love that. She was also an animal lover. She had two dogs named Duke and Duchess.
Wow.
Adorable. She also had a monkey, different time.
Okay.
Yeah, and a parrot.
Wow.
Yeah. So Julia and Dr. Wilkins, this was later in their life. They were older. They were in their late 60s, early 70s. And this was actually the third marriage for both of them. So by this time, Julia had her own estate, and she wasn't incredibly wealthy, but she had a lot of properties throughout New York, and they managed to live off of that. Now, Dr. Wilkins, as you may have guessed, was a physician. Doctor's not his first name. And he had retired because Julia had noticed that his practice was a strain on him and he's not in the best of health. So she'd urged him to retire, and together they managed her property. So
how old are they? So I can get a...
Well, like I mentioned before, if you were listening, you're probably drinking that flavor note. They are in their late 60s, early 70s.
Okay.
In 1919. So
Great
now,
year.
Dr. Wilkins and Julia, they ran a boarding house in New York City. That's the way they made money, and they had other properties. So they actually lived full-time in their summer home in Long Island. Or on Long Island. Is it on Long Island? We don't know. Okay. That's where they are. They're on Long Island. So they're walking home from the train station. It's about 15 minutes to their house. And they get there and they're in the back of their home. They go through the back door. Dr. Wilkins noticed that the front door, I assume they mean the screen door by that, is kind of unlatched, which is unusual. So he tells Julia to hang back, and he tests the main door, which is still locked. So he pulls out his key, opens the door, and the second he opens it, he's attacked.
No.
Somebody hits him over the head. He falls down. He yells to Julia, tells her to run. She runs to the end of their driveway and starts screaming for help for her husband.
Girl, get in the car.
Well, they're walking home from the train station, so helpful info, but probably not helpful to her at that point. So he hits Dr. Wilkins over the head again a second time, and Dr. Wilkins notices that two other men step over him and head towards Julia. So the man, who Dr. Wilkins later describes as a tall man in a hat, which isn't super helpful, but we'll call him the tall man, leans down and says, "We're not here to kill you. We're just here to rob you." He takes Dr. Wilkins' watch. He takes the money off of Dr. Wilkins, and then he leaves. Dr. Wilkins, tries to get himself together, and once he's able to stand, he heads towards Julia. The men flee, and when he gets to Julia, she's been severely beaten. There is a hammer by her body.
What?
Dr. Wilkins runs for help. They don't have a telephone, so he runs to his neighbors to call for help, and then he runs back to Julia because he's, a doctor and her husband, and they wait for the medics to arrive. So the medics come and they take Julia to the hospital. And sadly, later that night at the hospital, Julia passes away from the attack.
But they said they weren't there to kill them.
That's what the tall man said, but the other two men attacked Julia. So Julia passes away later that night, and immediately the police are investigating this, right? They're all over it. So they start by getting a statement from Dr. Wilkins, which you've basically just heard me retell. And they bring in, there's police everywhere. So there's only one way to get in and out of Long Island at that time, by bridge. And so there's a guard there, and they talk to the guard. Did anybody come in or out on these times? And nobody had been over the bridge before or after the murder.
So they
go to the train station,
maybe.
And they talk to people who are going to get on the next train, because it's not for a couple hours. We know Julia and Dr. Wilkins arrived at 9, so the next train isn't for a couple hours. There's nobody there. So they're searching the house. They kind of put together from the layout of the house that what they think happened is these 3 men entered the home. The dogs came up to them. Duchess, who's super friendly, they just let her outside. She was found later roaming the neighborhood. Duke is not as friendly, or as you might say, is protective. They believe he attacked the intruders, and they actually injured him.
No.
He's okay. He's at the vet's. But that's what they believe happened. And then they think that the 3 men just sat around the dining room table, eating, drinking, waiting for the Wilkins to come home so that they could rob them.
Yeah, that's what the interesting part. I was like, why? It seemed like they were waiting to spring on them, when usually you rob a house, you just get stuff and go.
Yeah. I know, exactly. So they think that the men were kind of like eating and drinking. They said feasting. And they bring in
Sound like
somebody to take
pirates.
fingerprints, right? I mean, they're really trying to be thorough. They even look into the Wilkins, which you do in a good investigation. So they're talking to the
Sure.
neighbors, like, what are the Wilkins like? You know, they're an older, kind couple. They kind of keep to themselves. They look into their finances. You know, like I said, Julia's not incredibly wealthy, but her estate would probably be worth about $1 million today. So with all
Okay.
her properties included, so
Yeah.
she's okay. They also find her will. Her will was made in 1903, so it was before she even married Dr. Wilkins, and it leaves everything to charity, with the exception of with the exception of her niece and nephew.
Wow.
So nothing's even going to Dr. Wilkins, which
Right.
is
Nothing
probably a surprise
suspicious.
to him. So they're trying really hard to find out who these three men are, and because they believe they didn't actually leave Long Island, they are kind of have a few known criminals under surveillance, and they believe that they hauled up somewhere that night. So the police are on it, right? So put a pin in Julia's story. I need to start to tell you about Audrey Munson. So Audrey was born in 1891. She was born to Edgar and Kitty, and Edgar
Cute.
was said to have kind of a fancy pants family back in England, but
Okay.
he was really on his own here in upstate New York. And they weren't well off. He worked as a driver when Audrey was born, and he had dreams, though, of making it big in the real estate business. So he started going on these long trips out west, and he would, essentially buy property and resell it. You get what real estate is. And
Thanks for that. Really appreciate that refresher.
just wanted to really hone in on that detail. And so while he's gone on these long trips, Kitty and Audrey are, by themselves. And
Yeah.
it starts to kind of fracture the relationship between Edgar and Kitty. And eventually Edgar
Oh.
actually takes up with another woman. And
That
Kitty
jerk.
says, no, thank you. And she divorces him.
Good
And
for her.
so Audrey's only 8 years old.
Good Kitty.
Audrey's only 8 years old at this time. And her dad still stays in her life. I mean, but, it's 1898.
Right.
So they're writing letters to each other. They see each other occasionally. And he actually marries the woman that was his mistress, and they have several children together on their own. So it's pretty much just Kitty and Audrey against the world.
Mm.
And I mean, can you imagine being a single mother in
Back then?
1898? Right?
What I want to know is Kitty her real name, and is that something I can call people? Is that a real name?
It's short for Catherine, I believe.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Bummer.
Well,
anyways, please continue.
I mean, you can call people. You can call me Kitty if you want.
Okay. Maybe we'll.
So, Kitty and Audrey are in upstate New York, and Kitty actually runs or manages a boarding house to make money. And Audrey actually attends high school and gets quite a good education, especially for that time period. And she even has music classes and art classes, and she's apparently said to be an accomplished musician. So she's pretty talented, pretty intelligent, and has dreams of being in the theater. So Kitty fully supports this, and actually when she's a teenager, they go to New York City, and she has these small parts, and eventually she gets a part as a chorus girl in a Broadway show, and they move to New York City permanently. So they're moving to New York City when it's just getting ready to explode, right? Very exciting stuff.
Right, because we're in the early 1900s.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So Kitty is a nurse in New York, and they have this teeny tiny little apartment, as you can imagine. And one day, Kitty and Audrey are window shopping, and they notice that this man is following them. So they try to lose him. Like, they speed up, they slow down, they duck into some shops, and he stays with them. So eventually they just turn and say, what the heck? Yeah. I'm sure it was more eloquent than that, but they confront him, and he says, I'm so sorry. I'm a photographer, and I would really like to photograph your daughter, which is the creepiest thing that somebody could say.
Run.
But he gives Kitty his information, and Kitty does her research.
Kitty.
She's no fool. And he's actually a very respected photographer in New York City.
He needs to work on his introductions. Let's put it that
way.
He
needs to work on the meets, but he's actually a pretty nice guy by all accounts. So they go and he takes pictures of Audrey. If you haven't guessed, Audrey's incredibly beautiful. She's said to have long bones, which is my favorite description. But in other words, she's tall. She's 5'8".
What is happening?
And she's perfectly
What a
symmetrical
weird way.
is the
Okay.
description that I always read about her.
Long bones, perfectly symmetrical.
Yes,
That's
she
what
has
we're going for.
long brown hair, blue-gray eyes, beautiful skin. And he takes pictures of her and then he passes them around to his artist community friends, which, as you can imagine, is thriving in New York City at this time.
Yeah, for sure.
And Isidore Conti, who becomes or is a pretty good sculptor at that moment in time, wants to work with her. So Kitty and Audrey go to meet him and he explains that he wants her to model for his next work, which is going to be called The Three Graces, and it's going to be in New York City at the Hotel Astor.
Ooh.
So Audrey, of course, is all, yeah, that sounds great. Let's do it. However, for this, you'll have to be nude. He tells her.
Don't.
And Kitty says, pack it, we're out. Let's go.
Yep. Good job, Kitty.
And she grabs her and they start to leave. And Isidore says, hold on. Like, just hear me out. So over the next several months, he actually basically gives Kitty an art history lesson and explains to her that he has no desire to portray Audrey in any kind of illicit or sexual way, but it's about capturing the human form and it's about art. And at the same time, Audrey is just begging her mother for this opportunity. So after 3 months, Kitty says, okay, but I'm going to be front and center. So she goes with Audrey and she sits with her and she models for the work and it's fantastic. It's beautiful. And from this, Audrey starts to get a lot of other modeling jobs. And actually, over the course of the next several years, she is featured in hundreds of works of art. She's in photographs, illustrations, sculptures, statues, stained glass. She even appears on the $50 for a time. And her statues are still all over New York City. And that's why so many people have never heard of her. She's considered the first supermodel, and nobody's ever heard of her, or some people have, but a lot of people haven't. She's kind of been forgotten. She has in statues to this day that are in Central Park.
That is so cool.
The New York Public Library, the Manhattan
We'll put some on our
Bridge.
Instagram so you guys can see
we'll put
too.
some pictures up. I mean, they're beautiful statues. So she's posing, she's modeling during this time. And she's in high demand because not only is she beautiful with the long bones, right? But she's also apparently very good at it. So when I think of modeling, I always think like, oh, it's glamorous and you kind of just hang out while somebody takes your picture. But think about the statues that you've seen. There's rarely a statue that's just lounging on the couch, right? So like she has to hold these poses for hours. So I mean, statues always have like an arm outstretched to the heavens or you're on tiptoe. And apparently she could hold a pose far longer than other models. So artists really liked working with her. And to the point where she would hold it, I'm sure she got breaks, but I mean, she's working like these 12-hour sessions. And she would go home and Kitty would soak her in the tub and then like, massage her and get her ready for the next day. Wow. And Audrey's only making 50 cents an hour.
Seems like a livable wage.
I know. So she said the most she ever made from modeling was maybe $30 a week for like a really long work week. And that was just enough to pay their bills.
That's terrible, especially if she's like become so iconic.
I know. Yeah. Ugh. So and then on top of that, you add to it that, not all, Isidore was incredibly nice and the photographer was incredibly nice, but you're working with a whole slew of different personalities. So she actually tells the story of going to an artist's studio to pose and she disrobes and she's ready to go. And he starts pouring freezing cold water over her because he wants her to appear like she's under a waterfall, which she screams and gets her robe and starts to leave. And he holds her at gunpoint.
What?
And forces her to stay there until he's done with the work. And she actually got really sick from it. And to his credit, I guess, the artist actually paid for her doctor bills because she was very ill after that session. So, I mean, it's not always easy and she's making 50 cents an hour. On top of it, it depends on the medium she would do. So sometimes she would have to be set in plaster. Did you ever do that for like a school project?
Yeah, like our hands.
Yeah. So she would be set in plaster from head to toe. So she's covered in, something like a Vaseline, right?
Yeah.
And then you wrap the plaster around her body. They start at her toes and they would go all the way up, and she could not move even a fraction of an inch or she'd ruin it. So by the time they'd get to her face, they'd give her this teeny tiny little straw, and then they'd cover her whole face, which she hated. And she said the worst part was that she couldn't actually really truly breathe because the plaster was so tight against her ribs.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, so she couldn't get a full breath. So she's just taking these teeny tiny sips of air just to make sure she doesn't pass out until it dries and they can get her out of it. So that was her least favorite thing to do, right? So Audrey's working hard for the money, for sure. She's very good at it. And then what ends up happening is in 1915, there is this big exposition. It's in San Francisco. At this point, she's already getting recognized around New York because she's everywhere. But this one's in San Francisco, and it's called the Panama Pacific Exposition. And this is not like a craft fair in the high school, auditorium. This is world-renowned artists are coming from all over and displaying their work. And she's featured in at least a dozen pieces.
Oh.
So people recognize her again. Can you imagine, it's one thing to be recognized from Instagram, but you're recognized because you're set in stone.
Right? That's incredible.
Like this huge, huge statue looking down. So she gets a lot of buzz from that, which is exciting. I mean, there's also people who are just aghast because, nipples and nudity. Right? But these works of art are beautiful. And for the most part, she's getting just a lot of recognition and praise, and she starts to get a little bit more work. So after this expo, she gets approached to try something new. A fashion company has this great idea. Why don't we put the clothes on live women and showcase it, right? So she's in a fashion show.
All right.
And it's billed as 20 beautiful women and Audrey Munson. Right? Because she's Miss Manhattan. That's what they call her. So it's going great. She's getting a lot of meetings and talks with people in the theater business, which again is her main goal. And she's very excited. The fashion show is only supposed to run for a short time. And then after that, by all, signs, she's going to have a role in a theater production. So after about a week, she's backstage getting ready for the next show. And this man approaches her from behind. And he starts kissing her and putting his hands on her. So she spins around, pushes him away. He is a prominent figure in the theater business.
Ugh.
And he says something along the lines of, "You mean to tell me you're not attracted to me?" To which I forget her quote, but it's something very eloquent, essentially summed up as like, "Ew, no, bye." And he says, "You will regret this." And he leaves. And that fashion show is suddenly canceled. And every single one of her theater offers are gone. Now, the fashion show picks up later in a different location, and they continue to use Audrey's picture for promotional material. But she's not getting any money. She's not getting paid for it.
This is crap.
I know. It's awful. So she actually, to her credit, she tries to bring a lawsuit against them.
Yeah.
And it's not known what happened. They don't know if she was kind of forced and pressured into dropping it or if it settled out of court. But something happened and resolved. And, she was trying to fight for what was rightfully hers. And eventually she gets an offer to star in a movie. And so, all right, great. Cool. Bye theater. Hello, silver screen. And this is still silent film days that we're in. So the movie that she's going to star in, it's called Inspiration. And she is going to play an artist's model. And actually, she's going to, one of the famous scene in the film is she's going to be set in plaster. Her least favorite modeling gig. And in order to do this, she has to be nude.
Mm-hmm.
So she actually is the first leading lady to appear naked in a non-pornographic film. And the movie is released. And again, as you can imagine, it's mixed reviews, right? There are people protesting, parents are claiming that it's ruining their child's morality. There's a whole big hubbub.
Right. But this is like Prohibition era, so it's all the crazies.
I mean, anytime there's something that's pushing the envelope, there's going to be, that kind of, what's the word I'm trying to think of?
Mindset.
I don't know. Revolution. Anyway, all the box offices in New York are actually sold out.
Right.
the protest is doing something for the movie. So she gets a contract to do 2 more films.
Oh, good for
And
her.
her and Kitty moved to California. And during this time, Audrey's seems like she's doing okay. She's filming. She's also writing a column in the newspaper. It's a beauty column. And I haven't read any of it, but the book that I read about Audrey's life is The Curse of Beauty by James Bone. And it detailed this time, and it alluded to the fact that a lot of these articles were maybe not what you would expect. So if you think of a beauty column, you kind of, if in the early 1900s, you kind of expect it to read a certain way. But one of the articles she wrote talked only about a woman's biggest beauty secret is just wellness, just to be healthy, because that'll shine through and people will be attracted to that.
Interesting.
And she also,
It's coming
she
full
was
circle nowadays.
Yeah, right. And she was often she loved to go to the beach, and she would wear a one piece, and she would often speak out saying, I don't even think intentionally, but just saying women should be able to wear one pieces just like men.
Yeah.
Which she can't even vote. So she makes this comment, that women should be allowed to wear one piece suits just like men, because at that time, I don't know exactly what a bathing suit looked like at that point for women, but I'm sure it was like wearing snow pants. Right, going into the ocean, which is safe as well as comfortable.
Yeah.
So Audrey's doing okay. After her second film's released, her third film, she finishes filming on it, and it's in production, and she goes back to New York, and she actually has a little bit of money, not a ton.
Okay, I was wondering how she's doing financially now.
Yeah, she actually, for the first film, she only made about a little over $400. So she made a little bit more on the other two, but she has a little bit money, but not a lot. But she's still high off of these career highs, right? Like, this is exciting stuff. She's got 2 films out. She's got a third one ready to go. She's also composing music. She's got some stuff in the works there. So she's doing okay. Unfortunately, that third film kind of hits some bumps and keeps getting delayed. And then eventually, for nobody knows to this day, but they never release it. And nobody's sure why that is. So, during this time, there's some high society stuff that's going on with Audrey, and this part of her life is a little foggy. I'm not going to get into it here, but again, read The Curse of Beauty if you want to get more detail on it. But eventually what ends up happening is she's told that film's not going to be released, and so she's trying to make moves with her music, and she has some offers either in Canada or from Canada. She plans to go to England. It's a little unclear, but she's working on getting out of the US for a little bit of time and trying some other offers, probably in the theater or in shows. So before that happens, her and Kitty move into a boarding house again. They're there for just a couple months because the plan has always been like to accept these offers.
Yeah.
And then they go to Canada. So while she's in Canada, Audrey receives a notification from the police, and the media in the US releases that an actress is wanted for questioning in the investigation of Julia Wilkins.
All right, so we're back to the first case.
Yes. So if you remember when we left Julia, right, she had passed away. The investigation was underway.
Third marriage.
And they really haven't made any progress. So the boarding house that Kitty and Audrey stayed in was the Wilkins boarding house in New York City, right before they went to Canada.
Oh.
And, Audrey says, yeah, I knew the Wilkins. Obviously, I stayed there. But, I didn't really know them that well. Like, they just, did you have a fight? They were asking her all these questions. No, the plan was always that we were going to move on, and I was going to go on to my next opportunity. So a lot has happened since the night of the murder and to the time when they want to question Audrey. So the police were unable to really get anywhere. They couldn't find anybody that looked good for this murder. So they bring in Detective William Burns, who is called the American Sherlock Holmes.
Wow, William Burns. It's a good last name.
He starts from the beginning. So he brings Dr. Wilkins in, and he says, tell me what happened. And Dr. Wilkins is more than happy, to cooperate. He's there. He's calm. He tells him everything, just like I told you in the beginning of this. He tells them everything that happened. But the press, the New York Times reports that Dr. Wilkins is asked a few questions that they don't really understand where they came from. So he's asked about Julia's jewelry, which is hard to say. And he's also asked about a screwdriver in the house. And they don't really understand why, but okay. And, also during this time, Dr. Wilkins' lawyer comes forward and says, hey, we just want you to know that we've actually found a second will. And it was made in 1915.
Okay.
And it lists Dr. Wilkins as the beneficiary, but it was never witnessed, so it's not even valid.
Null. Yeah.
Yeah, but we just wanted to let you know that we found it. Okay, fine. So Dr. Wilkins goes through, fully cooperates, tells Detective Burns everything that he asks. And Dr. Burns, not Dr. Burns, sorry. Then Detective Burns says to the press, have no comment, but an arrest is imminent. And it's at that point that Dr. Wilkins decides to go on a little trip. So he leaves town.
No.
So over the next several days, the paper is reporting that they're looking for him. And his lawyer says, I don't know where he is.
Was it all set up? Oh my God.
So they're looking for Dr. Wilkins now. A couple days, he's only gone a couple days. They find him in a train station.
Right, he's an old man.
He has shaved, which is a little unusual because he had these distinctive kind of mutton chops. We'll post a pic.
Okay.
And he's shaved, so he's clean shaven. And the police approach him. Somebody called in a tip that they had, they'd seen him, and the police approach him, and he says, oh, thank God you're here. I didn't realize you guys were looking for me. I just went to Baltimore to kind of get away from it. Like, hey, I'm glad you're here. Give me a ride. I'm happy to go. So the police take him, and he asks to change his suit because he's been traveling. So they take him to his house, and the story goes, I hope this is true. The story goes that Detective Burns is at the house with Dr. Wilkins, and Dr. Wilkins goes into the house, and Duchess runs up and gives him, dog kisses and butt shakes. And Duke says, no, thank you, and gives him a look. And it's said that Detective Burns knew at that moment, without a doubt, that Dr. Wilkins killed his wife.
No. Wait.
Waiting.
So there were no other people? Because this was their account, and she died.
He's the only eyewitness.
Why would he beat her with a hammer? She's an aging woman.
No, she's short, stout, and strong-willed.
So wow, I was not expecting. This is a twist.
Well, Detective Burns is not. He didn't just go by a dog's look. I mean, I love that that's a story, but this is
that's why he's Sherlock.
Yeah, that's why he's Sherlock. There is no particular. I'm not going to list these in the order that he discovered them, but before the dog and after the dog, he's got a lot of work going on in the background. So if you remember those questions that the New York Times called out as a little bit, well, where did those come from? So apparently the hammer by Julia's body, it was wrapped in a newspaper, like with a twine, and it also had green paint on it. There was a screwdriver in the house that had the same green paint on it. And so Burns asked him, do you own the screwdriver? Yes, I do. Do you own this hammer? No, it's not mine. Well, then how did the green paint get on both of them? Right? That's suspicious.
Bozo.
Also, the jewelry that belonged to Julia. I knew that was going to be tough. Julia's jewelry, so tough to say, was found in a drawer later in the house that they had thoroughly searched.
That they robbed, quote.
That's suspicious, right? And then there's so much. So the only fingerprints found at the scene were on the hammer and also on a piece of lead pipe. They belonged to Dr. Wilkins. He said that that's because he moved them to get to Julia. Fine. The newspaper wrapped around the hammer and even stuffed into the lead pipe found at the scene was bits of that same edition were found in a pocket of Dr. Wilkins. The watch that was taken from Dr. Wilkins' body was later found on one of their properties. Money that was taken was found, again, on one of their properties.
This guy sucks.
The second will that they presented was, remember, this is typewriter time. They found the typewriter it was created on, and it was a typewriter that Dr. Wilkins used regularly.
Wow.
Yes. His tailor came forward and said, hey, a couple days after the murder, Dr. Wilkins brought me a suit and it actually had blood on it and I had to send it to the cleaner. I just assumed at the time, because he's a doctor, like that's not weird. But now I'm coming forward. And Dr. Wilkins said that was not his suit. But the housekeeper and the tailor said, yes, it was his suit. Also, they re-interviewed everybody, and it was discovered that Dr. Wilkins did not accompany Julia to the hospital. He actually showed up 15 minutes after she died, and the only thing he asked was, did she name anyone?
Ew.
Which, if you've seen the people who have killed your wife, you're probably not going to ask that question.
Of course not.
Like, you know who they are. They're strangers. Julia's not going to know who they are. You've seen them.
Wow. Sketchy behavior.
Add to that, remember, Dr. Wilkins said he got hit on the head twice.
Yep.
He doesn't have any injuries. He said his hat saved him.
Was that not suspicious at the forefront? I mean, if some people are like hitting you twice, you're gonna. What kind of hat are we talking about here?
I know, that's what, right? Like, is the hat made of steel?
After the World War I?
And also, if the the blows were absorbed by this magic hat, then why did you take so long to get to your wife? Right? Because you're fine.
Wow. I didn't even suspect him.
So it's paired, all this evidence, and then they also additionally get some tips in. And the tips are that, yes, Dr. Wilkins is a retired physician, but he kept his license, and he actually has an apartment that has a night bell, and people ring it when they need morphine.
Okay.
So he's effectively a drug dealer.
Yep.
He's also self-admittedly on morphine regularly.
Okay.
Morphine has a different context in 1919, but still. And then there was also a rumor that he was having an affair with another woman for the last 2 years.
No.
So that's why the police want to talk to Audrey, because Dr. Wilkins had been overheard making a comment about her. And it was some offhand comment like, make sure she doesn't marry or she'll lose her symmetry, which is I'm paraphrasing, but it was such like an old-timey old man comment that I don't even know. Right?
Wow.
But that doesn't mean that Audrey was like, oh, I'm in love. This is fantastic.
Right.
It was probably, I mean, Julia was the one who actually dealt with Audrey and Kitty. Kitty and Audrey said they rarely talked to Dr. Wilkins. But they believed him to be innocent. They thought he was nice, mild-mannered, older man.
They know him from the boarding house they were temporarily in, right?
Yeah, they were only there for a couple months. And they left 2 weeks before the murder.
Okay.
And even Dr. Wilkins, I mean, I don't know how much you can believe of Dr. Wilkins, but even Dr. Wilkins said, I had nothing to do with Audrey. So both of them say that. They want Audrey to come back for the trial. She refuses, but she agrees to do an affidavit, and her and Kitty both do their own statement and sign sworn, and they send it over. They don't even use the affidavit in the trial, but it's too late. Like, Audrey's name has already been leaked, and the police clear her pretty quickly. Like, they realize she had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
But their new kind of working theory is that the doctor was obsessed with Audrey and killed Julia so that then he would be free to marry.
What?
I don't
know.
They
were never together.
I know. I mean, he became obsessed. I mean, she's a celebrity.
Yeah. So he became a psycho.
I mean, it's possible. I feel like they did. I mean, they have so much evidence against him. I just don't know if that piece of it is right. Like, there's a lot of questions I have. I don't know that he was interested in Audrey in that way. It feels like it maybe was a spur of in the moment kind of thing that happened, simply because I wonder this because of Duke and Duchess. Because I bet you Duke tried to attack Dr. Wilkins, and that's why Duke was injured. And I feel like if it had been planned, the doctor would have known this in advance and kind of put the
shut them
dogs
in a room.
up. Yeah.
So maybe they got in an argument on the way home from the train station or something, or maybe she found out about the affair and confronted him,
right? Or his drug dealing,
or that, and he just lost it. Maybe he had one too many brandies at dinner.
Yeah, I'm really unsure like the reasoning behind it. But I mean, Audrey's by the police and her own statement, and even Dr. Wilkins' statement, she had nothing to do with it. So Dr. Wilkins is charged and he goes to trial and he is found guilty.
Good.
And the day before he is about to be transferred to Sing Sing, he asks to go to the bathroom
Uh-oh.
and he commits suicide. He leaves a note that says something to the effect of, "I wish to be my own executioner despite my innocence."
Despite innocence.
Yes. And yeah, so Julia, I believe that she got justice. I believe the right man was probably found, but terrible ending
Wow.
to her story.
Yeah, I mean, that's a terrible way, like, to kill somebody. That's
Yeah,
really
and
brutal.
the other thing that I didn't mention is they actually exhumed her body once all this there's more evidence too that was involved, but they actually exhumed her body, and you might want to mute for this part. Earmuffs. They found out from the autopsy that she was hit above the brow line 17 times and then once to the hand. Alana, you can come back.
I'm back.
So the results of that autopsy, they didn't make sense for an intruder who was on the run trying to overpower an older woman. They were too violent
Ugh.
to be it was another piece that bothered them.
Right, if
Right?
somebody was just trying to rob the house and go, they might hit her over the head once with something and then take off.
And
Because,
then
again, she's in
leave.
her 60s, 70s. She's not going to be trying to fight them.
Yeah, exactly. That was their theory as well. So this kind of the Wilkins story kind of comes to this tragic end. And Audrey is left having only lived there for a couple months, and that seems to be her only connection to them.
Right.
Her life, her professional life is completely ruined.
Just because of this?
Oh, it is just a huge scandal. Her production company officially releases her. The music that she had kind of working in the background, that completely gets shut down. She is just destroyed by the media. And
Wow.
she can't even go out in public. So she'll go to the movies, people will get up and move to the other side of the theater.
But this is after he was found guilty.
Mm-hmm.
But just because her name was brought up in the investigation.
Yeah, and so she would like
Wow.
she recounts being out in public and people would point and say things like, "That's the woman whose husband killed his wife for." And
Oh.
she started getting hate mail.
Oh my God.
I mean, it was insane the amount of hate that was thrown at
Yeah.
Audrey. Is the only person left standing in this who, by all accounts, had nothing to really do with it
Right.
other than live at their house for a couple of months. So about a year after the murder, a very gaunt older woman walks into a newspaper office and says, "I would like to post a death certificate for Audrey Munson."
No, it's Kitty and it's her baby.
Well, the newspaper clerk looks at her and says, "Miss Munson?" It was
Right.
actually Audrey. She had put the disguise on and she was trying to make it seem like Audrey was dead so she could reinvent herself. So she runs out of there sobbing.
Oh, whoops.
And she's starting, like, she had shown some cracks before the murder. And her mental health was quickly deteriorating.
Sure.
And
I mean, that's got to be rough.
it's so rough and challenging.
Everything is taken from you.
Everything's taken from her and she's just hated by the public. She was like this figure that everybody knew, and it's really too much for her. And there's not good mental health services.
No, I have a bad feeling about
in
this.
1920. So, Kitty and her are now upstate New York again, and Kitty's selling silverware door to door to support them.
Because they're broke now?
Yeah, they are broke. Audrey claims that she applied to over 200 jobs, and I'm not talking like actress jobs,
Like
librarian,
dishwasher.
waitress, yeah, anything. And every single time she was rejected. And she said the excuses were far more painful than the truth.
Oh, man.
So,
poor girl. That's so unfair. She was so removed.
yeah. and she just felt like, think about, it's not just this one scandal too. She was feeling this way for so many years, she's not getting any royalties from these
Yeah,
works of art that are
right.
still being seen in museums. She's not getting any money from the films. She's not getting any money
She's totally
from
screwed over.
these deals that she should be getting
Yeah.
some income from. So she lives now, she's kind of like the town eccentric in this little
Okay.
tiny town in upstate New York, and just basically stays at home and paints all day. And Kitty supports them. Different jobs. Often she's a caregiver for the elderly or a
Mhm.
nurse, or, like I said, selling silverware door to door. And Audrey, when she's in her late 30s, Audrey actually attempts to commit suicide. She survives, thankfully. And Kitty tries really hard to take care of her. Kitty's getting older, obviously. That's how time
Right.
works. But Kitty's getting
Thanks for that
older, and it's
refresher.
getting harder and harder for her to take care of Audrey
Yeah.
and
support the family.
Yeah, and work. And so Audrey's starting to kind of display some other symptoms depression
Yeah.
and delusions of grandeur. And Kitty's getting really concerned that she's going to hurt herself again or hurt somebody. So she has her committed to an asylum.
Yeah, I thought this was coming.
Now, I think it's believed that Kitty thought this would be temporary, but that's not how it worked then. And Kitty later really regrets this decision and doesn't have the money to fight to get Audrey back.
Oh, man.
So Audrey actually stays in the asylum for the rest of her life.
Oh, God.
And Kitty is her only visitor until Kitty passes away.
Right.
Now,
Rest of her life.
But I will say this. Audrey actually lived to be 104 years old.
No, she didn't.
And she was loved where she was. So the staff adored her. They called her Miss Audrey. And the staff claims that, in her later years, she showed no signs of any mental illness.
Really?
Like, she wasn't even really treated for anything, they said, but this was her home. She was treated like a celebrity there.
So maybe she like healed mentally and was able to, I don't know, find some peace and a community and a family there. And so she probably got happier.
Yeah, I'm not, I like to think that. I don't know exactly. I don't know what her diagnosis was. Like I said, mental health has come so far since then. And I mean, it's very plausible for me to think that the pressure of, Kitty and Audrey's life was just too much at the time.
Right.
And this gave her
that was taken
release.
away.
Yeah. So they just describe her. She just sounds so amazing in her older years. So they kind of pampered her, and like they would have to get the patients ready for bed, and they would always make sure that Audrey was last. So they would let her soak in a bubble bath.
Stop.
And they said every morning she had Cheerios, but before she ate it, she would dip her fingers in the milk and rub it on her skin as a beauty treatment.
Oh my God.
And they were like, I don't know, but it worked because she had beautiful skin. She was 104 years old.
She just smelled a little weird.
And she would tell stories of, olden times, and she loved animals. Obviously, she was not allowed to have an animal here. So she would carry like a stuffed kitten around with her. And the staff would put nuts on her windowsill so that she could watch the squirrels come up and take them. And the energy that I like to imagine that she had in her older years is, have I ever told you the story of Brad meeting that older woman in the Hollywood Hills?
No.
So Alana and I both used to live in Los Angeles. That's where we met. And Brad, my husband, and I lived in Hollywood. And if you walked up and took a couple lefts and rights, you were actually in Hollywood Hills, where like the beautiful houses are scaled up on these mountains. And Brad was out for a run or a walk or something, and he had his headphones in, and he saw this woman on his front porch, like waving him down. And so he takes out his headphones, and she's like, excuse me. And he goes up to her, and her house was set up. A lot of the houses are like this on the hills to get the view. there was a long flight of stairs to her front door. And so she said, "Can you get my mail?" He said, "Oh boy, this poor woman." He said she was all of 80. She's in like her house coat. She's got curlers on. And so he gets the mail and he runs it up the stairs for her and he hands it to her. And the next thing out of her mouth is, "You're probably wondering where I got my looks."
Stop it right now. That's amazing.
Love that line. Like I say it all the time at the house. Like when I look especially terrible, I'll be like, "You're probably wondering where I got my looks."
That's amazing.
I know, right? Like the confidence. Like you're 80 years old, you're in your PJs, and you're like, "Hey, you're what? How old are you? 27? You're probably wondering where I got my looks." And Brad, Southern gentleman, just stood there for, I don't know, probably a couple of days talking to her. And she's like, "My mommy was a model." And this woman talked to him. So I like to imagine that that's the kind of confidence Audrey had in her older years.
I feel that.
So she, was pretty comfortable there. And actually, I said she didn't have another visitor after Kitty passed away. But eventually, if you remember, her father had several other children who Audrey knew growing up. They were her half brothers and sisters. And so one of her nieces actually found her when she was late into her 90s and would come visit her once in a while. Like, I don't think they lived near. Nice. So I think once a year she would come and visit her Aunt Audrey. Yeah.
Wow.
So, yes, Audrey passed away peacefully at 104, but her story was just ruined by Dr. Wilkins' actions.
God.
Julia was
ruined.
Violently, her life ended because of Dr. Wilkins' actions. And really not a lot is known about either one of those women. So Audrey is featured, like I said, in all these works of art.
I'm so excited to see them all.
They're beautiful. So we'll post the ones that we can on our Instagram. And then, Julia, I just feel such a kindred spirit in her description and Duke and Duchess. Like, I feel like she'd probably takes no prisoners. And it was a sad, sad ending to her life.
Yeah. Wow.
Do you think, like, you think for sure Dr. Wilkins was correctly found guilty?
I mean, if you think about it, it was weird at the start that they were waiting to spring on them, right? When they're coming home. Like that's odd. That's not a smart thing to do as a robber because the risk is so much higher.
Yeah.
As a professional robber, I could say that. I'm just kidding.
You know what you're talking about.
And like all the evidence that Detective Burns picked up, I mean, it really does point to him. And he's having an affair. Like, who knows?
Yeah, the affair was never, I don't think they could find who it was. So I just really wonder what the motive was. Also, I mean,
he's on morphine.
On morphine. Well, I wonder, and he might have struggled with addiction. And again, it's 1919. There's not a lot of support for that either. So I don't know. And I find it curious, though, that they introduced the second will if it's not valid. What do you think did he think that maybe once he was cleared of all charges, he was going to contest it in court?
Maybe. And maybe he didn't know how it worked.
Yeah, that could be. That's why I wonder if Julia actually signed it. Or if he forged her signature, or if... Because I have to assume that she had at least signed it for them to even present it. So I don't know what his play was there.
No.
If that was... Maybe he just was hoping he could contest it and at least get something.
I mean, he seems like not the smartest guy, but it could also be the morphine.
Yeah.
Like, you can hallucinate on that, and then obviously the withdrawals are terrible.
Yeah.
It's intense. And
I told you, their first initial sweep of people said that, they were pretty kind of quiet and kind of older couple. But when they started talking to people in the city, then people are saying he had a violent temper. But I feel like everybody says that once somebody...
Right. All the bad stuff will come out, and they're like, actually...
everybody says that about people who are in this kind of situation. So it's hard to say. Audrey didn't think he did it. She thought he was innocent. I mean, this was before she knew any of the evidence, but just that initial questioning, she's like, "There's no way. He was a really nice older man." But I don't know how her opinion changed after.
It's just so crazy how her life got destroyed from it, just from being tied to it for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, there are other things. It's never just that one thing. There were other things a little bit before and a little bit after that were kind of adding up, but this was just the last straw. And it was too much pressure. Could you imagine? Can't even go out without being just ridiculed.
Pelted with tomatoes.
Yeah. Yes.
No thanks. Wow, that's sad.
Yeah, it is a sad story. I love that Audrey at least seemed to find some comfort and some happiness in her older years.
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't possible for Julia. So I think at least Audrey got to, I mean, it wasn't probably what she envisioned or what she would have picked or what she would have mapped out, but it seems like she was really well cared for and
just
adored where she was.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it says something that she lives to 104, right?
Yeah.
Like she was cared for. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that is the story of Julia Wilkins and Audrey Munson.
Long bones.
Yes.
Wow.
How'd your tea hold up?
It's good. It's even good and a little chilly.
Oh, wow. All right.
It's nice. I felt a lot of mental clarity during that story.
Did you? Good. All right, cool. All right. Well, thank you for listening. You can find us on Instagram at
Tea Time Crimes.
And you can email us at
teatimecrimes@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, we would. And leave a review wherever you get your podcasts and reach out. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, rate and subscribe, please.
You got it. Any last words? She's thinking. Hold on. This might be good.
No.
Brad's going to definitely cue up the theme music for this pause. Nothing?
I got nothing. I could read something. There are words of wisdom on this cup. Do you want me to read one?
Are they Avatar? Because we probably don't have the
copyright
for that.
Failure is only the opportunity to begin again, only this time more wisely.
All right. That is
so I'll leave you with that.
An awkward piece of knowledge for the end of this podcast. All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.